The old saying goes, I'm not mad, just disappointed. My Little Pony Friendship is Magic ended around this time 2 years ago after 9 seasons. It was a sound finale that did everything a final episode should. It gave all the main characters proper closure while telling a story that teaches a lesson that appropriately encapsulates what the show was about. For a series about interpersonal relationships, this felt like an appropriate way to end the story. And then they decided to keep it going. But not in the way you might think. It was later announced on Equestria Daily that MLP would actually be getting a 10th season, continuing the story of Twilight and her friends where the finale left off. That sounds pretty good, except it was going to be exclusive to the comics.
Oh shit, here we go again.
And you can see there's already a problem. The thing with the comics is that they always tend to be mixed in terms of quality, mostly because the writing team is vastly different from the people who work on the show. There tends to be a strong clash with the continuity and world building between the two, especially when the comics establish something only for the show to retcon it. There's always been this questionable tone that came with the comics, but it was possible to view them as their own thing. They could be self-contained stories so you don't have to worry about something in the comics interfering with the show canon. But here, this is not the case. These particular issues are meant to tie directly into the show's canon, and it was already at a rough start. These issues only make up 15 episodes worth of story. The average season of the show is 26 episodes long. This means the season 10 comics have a vastly shorter amount of time to tell their story. And unlike the show where the story-based episodes were spread apart, the season-long story comics are practically back-to-back, which means the story is trying to play all the way through. But that shouldn't mean the story will automatically be bad, right? Regardless of the number of given episodes and how the story plays out, there's still a chance for it to be good, right?
Nope.
As you can tell from the title, this 10th season wasn't exactly good. And for something that's meant to be seen as the true final season or an extended epilogue, it doesn't serve as a satisfying send-off. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but this 10th season does not at all feel like it ends up doing what it's supposed to do. I mean, when you first heard about the season 10 comics, you would think they were going to focus on the relationships between the characters, right? The very thing that made the show so compelling and relatable. Really think about what we could have gotten. We could have gotten a coming-of-age story focusing on the CMC as they start getting older, or a story about Spike resolving his one-sided crush with Rarity. We could have gotten a story focusing on the Student 6, seen them develop new interests in school, maybe have them go through an existential crisis about growing apart like the main 6 did. Big Mac's marriage with Sugar Belle, Discord trying to redeem himself for the trouble he caused with Grogar's Bell, Flurry Heart ascending as the ruler of the Crystal Empire, Celestia reminiscing on her days as ruler after retiring, the main 6 pursuing their careers, maybe even a story about Sunset deciding if she should return to Equestria or if she truly belongs in the human world. There was an endless well of possibilities to draw from, so many different kinds of stories they could have done to provide a deeper sense of closure. It was something that practically writes itself. But instead, the 10th season of MLP decides to waste its time on a terribly paced, badly written story about the origin of the Trees of Harmony, with lousy and unengaging world building, poorly established villains, a group of uninteresting new characters, and a final battle that's even more unengaging than the one we initially got. But perhaps I should start from the beginning. The 10th season of MLP is a collection of plot points broken into parts, as the season has 2 ongoing stories. The primary ones focus on the discovery of more Trees of Harmony and how they're connected to Equestria's ancient history, with a secondary plot involving Pinky's relationship with Cheese Sandwich and her family. There is one episode about Scootaloo spending time with her parents and one other episode about Celestia and Luna getting back some dolls they lost as kids, but I genuinely do not care. With the rest of the season so hyper-focused on the Trees of Harmony and Pinky, these 2 episodes just feel like an afterthought. 2 issues worth of nothing that could have been used to improve the pacing of the main plot. But nope, it's just having them there for the sake of stalling time. Maybe I'd be more forgiving if they had more than 15 issues to develop this story, but this results in a good chunk of it being rushed. What do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look at the number of issues that focus on each tree. The Zebra tree has 4 issues focusing on it. The Abyssinia tree has 2. And both the Diamond Dog and Avian trees only have 1. And it's not just the trees either. All of the characters involved in each of these stories get varying amounts of time to develop their stories. Sakura gets 4 issues developing her backstory while Solano only gets 1. And I might not have minded too much if they actually focused on developing their backstories. But they don't, because a big chunk of these issues are spent building up the history surrounding multiple Trees of Harmony, which I'm just gonna cut to the chase. This is bullshit. There's multiple Trees of Harmony? Since when? You can't just throw this incredibly bizarre nonsense on us at the last minute and just expect us to go along with it. I get that magical MacGuffins are a common trope in storytelling, but you have to integrate them in a way that makes sense. These things are just shoehorned in at the final season, making what was once a slightly annoying plot device into an even more annoying plot device. You know that annoying trope where the writer introduces this really huge thing completely out of nowhere in a way that feels out of place, but they try to make it seem more important by writing the backstory like it was something that was there from the very beginning, despite there being absolutely no hint to the presence of this thing at any point in the story leading up to this moment? That's what these trees are. A lame plot device they came up with to force a bunch of world building into the comics. World building works best when it's appropriate for the story. You establish the setting of the story and roles in the magic system or whatever you're using to set up the world and its history. An example of this is Lord of the Rings, where they set up the plot by establishing the history of the world early on. They explain the different races, the different kingdoms, the origin of the rings, the tale of the One Ring, and everything after that focuses on the journey to destroy the ring and defeat Sauron while developing the characters. There's a difference between using world building to establish setting and rules and using it just because it sounds epic and cool, regardless of how it fits into the story. This ultimately fits into the latter category, because the presence of these trees is badly established. The only detailed explanation we get is in a few pages 2 issues before the finale. That's way too late into the story to explain what's going on. There being more elements of harmony seems like it took all of 10 seconds to come up with. It's incredibly lazy, and even then it completely cheapens the story by making the whole thing into a rehash of the series premiere. No, I'm serious. This is a rehash of the first 2-parter. A group of misfits become friends through a series of trials, and their friendship unlocks a source of power that's used to defeat the bad guy. One of them has a rocky relationship with another, but they talk it out and their friendship is rekindled by the end. It's formulaic and highly predictable, and they do this 4 times in almost the exact same way. They just try to make it look bigger and more epic by throwing in more characters and countries to cover up the laziness. And what makes it even worse is that the world building isn't even interesting. Take for example the Zebra Kingdom. This is something that fans have been curious about since the beginning of the show. Ever since Sakura made her first appearance. They wanted to learn about this strange land that she came from and what zebras are like in this show. Well, it ends up being incredibly disappointing. Everything about the Zebra Kingdom is just a rehash of Equestria, except it takes place in the desert. There's nothing alien or foreign in the culture compared to what we've seen in Equestria. Maybe it was interesting at first with the introduction of different types of zebras with special elemental powers, but it's mostly nothing we haven't already seen, to the point that it becomes boring upon reading it multiple times. Each of the 4 kingdoms we visit don't have anything that makes them stand out, which makes it feel like we're just visiting the same location 4 times. They try to make them look like completely different locations, but they don't feel different. It's just Equestria but with non-pony creatures. Ornithia is Griffinstone except the houses aren't ragged and worn out. Abyssinia is Manhattan but with cats, and Canania is just Canterlot cut in half. I know this sounds like I'm asking for too much, but when you're talking about world building, you can't just rehash things we've already seen. You have to give us something different to make this location interesting. None of these places are interesting because they're just repeats of old concepts, and they don't put time into explaining any differences in their culture, like something you would see in Mass Effect. And some of it just feels like they're hand-waving it away for no reason, like the explanation for different types of diamond dogs. Oh, they're just very distant cousins who aren't into fashion, which is supposed to explain why these diamond dogs look nothing like the ones from the show. Or that one other issue with Trixie. It's so brief and tagged on that you can easily miss it. So the problem here is that they try to make the world building look like a big deal while at the same time not delving into the worlds they create. It's just traveling to new places for the sake of traveling to new places. This story might as well take place in Equestria, because without context you would probably think this takes place in Equestria. If you weren't told these were different kingdoms, you would assume that these were places in Equestria but with non-pony creatures inhabiting a small village or a subsection of a city. So what exactly is the purpose of going to these places? Just saying it's to show the homelands of different creatures isn't enough if there's no purpose in the story. I guess they're trying to continue the theme of Season 8, trying to include more non-pony creatures, but the season isn't about the homelands or the different creatures. It's about these stupid trees of harmony that they just pulled out of their ass. I said earlier that it was lazy to just come up with more elements of harmony out of nowhere at the last minute, but there's more to it. The thing about the elements and the Tree of Harmony is that they were a unique portion of the lore that played a pivotal role in the story. A source of light that was used to fight dark forces that threatened Equestria. Season 7 added a little bit to this, by explaining that the tree was grown from a seed that the pillars planted in the forest, adding some of their magic to give it strength. This was actually a good explanation behind the creation of the Tree of Harmony. It was brief but simple, and it got the message across without any complicated mumbo-jumbo. Unfortunately, Seasons 8 and 9 ended up fucking with this by trying to explain that the Tree of Harmony was sentient and alive, taking the form of Twilight to communicate with the Student 6. And after King Sombra destroyed the tree, it ended up taking the form of the Treehouse of Harmony, acting as a sanctuary for the students. You'd think they were setting up something important here, like they would further delve into the connection between the students and the tree. Maybe having them work together in the final battle, something to symbolize the magic of the tree passing down to a new generation. But nope, they don't do that. The Tree of Harmony never makes an appearance in the finale. We never see any of the students interacting with it after the episode Uprooted. They just left the Tree of Harmony to be completely forgotten about. You'd think it would have played an important role in the final battle, but it never comes back. Like, what was the point of revealing all this information about the tree if it never comes back? So I guess this is supposed to be the origin story of the Tree of Harmony, right? Well, if this is supposed to be the real backstory, it's a giant retcon. Star Swirl and the Pillars were the ones who planted the seed that grew into the tree. Now they're trying to say the trees came from the Knights of Harmony. Star Swirl says he's never heard of the Knights, and yet he and the Pillars are perfectly able to replicate their magic to create a tree by themselves. So let me get this straight. All the other creatures have trees and elements built for them by some secret hidden guys, except for ponies who were able to make their own completely from scratch. Bullshit! That is so contrived and absolutely ridiculous. Why did they do this? Why did they think retconning the Tree of Harmony like this was a good idea? Adding more Trees of Harmony doesn't make it more special, it just makes it more gimmicky. Why should I care that there's more trees? Why does it make the Tree of Harmony more important? Maybe it would have been better if they were given more time to expand on what they were building up, but they don't do that. They just say, hey, there's more trees, and just leave it there with no explanation until 2 issues before the finale. And it's only 3 pages of exposition out of 40 in the entire comic. It's too vague of an explanation with several holes and questions left unanswered. So Celestia waited 1,000 years to find someone who can master the power of the elements when there were other elements around the world, and it was enough to put together a group of random people to activate them. You'd think she would have done this sooner to, oh, I don't know, rescue Luna from imprisonment. Even this exposition from the zebra tree is asinine. The spirit tells Ikora that anyone who wishes to use the elements with the help of their friends can use their power. But this contradicts what happened in the show. The tree only chose specific groups of people to use the elements. They remained inactive for 1,000 years until the main 6 woke them up. Whoever represents the elements needs very particular characteristics that connect them to the elements and a special bond that others don't have. Now they're saying any random group of people can use them at any time. Why didn't Celestia just get any random group of people to activate the elements? She could have done that to save Luna. And I suppose if I'm gonna keep talking about this, then I should start talking about the villains, who are a horrible last-minute addition. The Knights of Harmony are some of the most badly rushed, poorly established, and easily defeated antagonists in any piece of media I've ever seen. And that includes White Diamond from Steven Universe. Why are they so bad? Because they're only given 2 issues of development at the very end, which isn't nearly enough time to make a lasting impression. Say guys, I got a question. What if Aku only appeared in the last 3 episodes of Samurai Jack? Or what about if Thanos only appeared during the second half of Endgame? Or what if the leader of the Reapers appeared in the last 10 minutes of the 3rd game in the trilogy? That would be terrible, right? Could you imagine if we actually did that and gave people a villain that has no memorability because they were so shoehorned in at the end? Well, that's what IDW did. Seriously, I hate it when a series introduces a completely new antagonist in the last chapter of a story. It's always lazy. The conflict is forced because it just feels like something the author came up with out of nowhere. The villain feels out of place because they never appeared in any other instance throughout the series, and the way they're defeated is through some sort of Deus Ex Machina ass pull. And the Knights of Harmony fit all 3 of these categories. You'd think they would focus on a slowly growing group who would try to deal with each knight as the threat got closer to Canterlot. But nope, they all show up at once in the same spot, and half the ponies get conveniently defeated in a boring fight scene. Even the reveal of the other knights is completely lazy. It's almost like the writers were scared of making an arc that would last more than 3 issues, and it just results in more plot holes. Why didn't Discord, Cadence, and Star Swirl participate in the fight? You'd think they would have tried to do something after the force field fell. Are they really just doing nothing while everyone else is under attack? And why did the leader of the Knights say, now you understand why we need to destroy you? He didn't explain anything. Why are you telling your story after you attacked the city? You couldn't do that when you were at the force field? Twilight literally went there to see what you wanted and you didn't tell her. You moron! And of course you have the part where they pull the almighty power out of nowhere and defeat the villain in the most half-assed way possible. And this is where it really gets horrible. They built these guys as the most threatening antagonists in the series so far. the most powerful villains our heroes have yet faced, and then they're defeated as quickly as they show up. It makes their inclusion in the story completely pointless since they're only present for 2 issues before being thwarted, and it makes the build-up they were giving to these guys really cheap. These guys are supposed to be a bigger threat than the Storm King, Tyrek, Cozy Glow, Chrysalis, the Dazzlings, Nightmare Moon, Cosmos, the Pony of Shadows, King Sombra, and in the final issue they're defeated without so much as a challenge. Fucking weaklings. At least with the Terrible Trio, they were established villains from earlier seasons throughout the show. You believed in the threat they pose because you knew them from previous episodes. You've seen what they're capable of and how their threat level would increase if they joined forces. These Knights of Harmony don't pose any threat whatsoever, because they're only around for about 15 minutes before losing. They're shown to have a lot of power, but that power doesn't matter because they're defeated so fast. They defeat all the show's established characters easily, and then they themselves are defeated by characters who just got their elements 2 issues ago. This is what I mean about the story being rushed. The most important part of the entire arc, the conflict with the Knights of Harmony, is over in a snap. Maybe I wouldn't mind too much if they were properly developed and we got more of the individual members throughout the season, instead of just being shoehorned in the last few issues. And with the way the other parts of the story were lazily handled, it makes the whole thing choppy and uneventful. And just to add insult to injury, it turns out the reason the Knights are trying to destroy the elements is because Discord turned all their creatures against them, causing them to abandon their trust in them. So Discord once again is the cause for all of this bullshit, and once again he takes absolutely no responsibility for it, nor does he face any consequences for his actions. At this point the writers are just mocking us, because there is no way you can take this as insulting. He really should have been turned to stone along with the other villains. And by the way, Discord knew about the Knights of Harmony and yet he never bothered to reveal any information to Twilight when they were preparing for invasion? When was he gonna give her pointers on how to fight them after everyone was dead? At this point I'm actually wondering why any of these people bother to be on good terms with Discord. This is the 4th time he's been proven to be a liability who can't be trusted. This arc about the Tree of Harmony doesn't explore anything new about the world or the characters, and it doesn't add anything to the actual show. It's just telling the same story 4 separate times, which might have been okay if they made it entertaining, but it's not. The story is devoid of any good humor, which is especially bad since the show was good at developing comedy on a modest level, and even when they try to do something funny it feels undercooked. And another reason why it's not entertaining is because of how badly misused a lot of the characters are. Sakura in particular is horribly written in how she insults Applejack for the crime of not knowing what her life in the Zebra homeland was like, when she never made an attempt to mention her old life, thus she'd have no way of knowing. It seems more like a manufactured conflict imposed by the writer than something Sakura would actually lose her cool over. And when we get later into the comic, we see she's actually very welcome. Her reason for leaving wasn't because she was forced out or hated by anyone, she left on her own accord. So there was no reason for her to treat Applejack like that when she did nothing to antagonize her. Oh, but it's okay, because she had a bunch of supporting friends who genuinely liked her and were sad to see her abandon them by going on some crazy mission to the other side of the world to make potions. It makes her look like a petulant child throwing a tantrum, which is the exact opposite of how you'd expect her to behave based on literally every single one of her appearances in the show. And her backstory regarding her badly designed friends, seriously, who designed these things? It looks like something a child came up with after sniffing paint, just makes her look completely petty, constantly chastising them and distancing herself because she doesn't want to be boring like them. What kind of friend does that? She mentioned she was teased behind her back, but none of that is ever shown. So it feels like she's just complaining about problems she doesn't have. And when you get down to it, this backstory doesn't even make sense. Her not wanting to spend time with her friends to learn more about magic completely contradicts how friendly she is when she first meets the main 6. If she was really that antisocial, why would she open up so easily? And why is this even taking place in an African setting if you're not gonna take full advantage of it? No giraffes, no rhinos, no water buffalo, just zebras and zebras made of water. Wouldn't that have been more interesting? To see the African setting divided by different African animals? There's no interesting exploration of the zebra kingdom, and Sakura isn't properly written. It's hard to sympathize with her with how she's portrayed, and it's difficult to understand why she hates her friends and homeland as they aren't as bad as she acts. It feels like they just wanted to push Sakura out first so that the writers wouldn't have to bother with her. They just went, here's your obligatory Sakura backstory, and just flew by the seat of their pants for the rest of the comics. So this first arc is pretty much crap. Then you have the K9 issue. It's the worst one. Rushed as hell, no build-up, bare-bones exposition, abysmal conflict. They probably realized how boring it is to tell the same story 4 times and just wanted it over with as fast as possible. Seriously, the repetition in this one is so bad that there's practically nothing worth pointing out. The one with Capper is really stupid and ridiculous. This one is focused on providing closure to a subplot introduced in one of the prequel comics for the movie, where he reconciles with an old friend who he thought betrayed him. But it suffers from too many characters and too little story. There's the three ponies in Discord, Capper and his crew, the bad guy and his helpers. And it feels like there's way too much going on at once in this thing. A jailbreak, a heist, that tree nonsense for the third time in a row, and a subplot about magic being outlawed in the city. On some level I can understand the cats not liking magic since someone with magic took down their previous government for the Storm King, but then they pull out these collars that nullify magic. Okay, so they created a collar that stops someone from using magic. That's fine. But these collars are somehow strong enough to stop Discord's magic. These guys, who are still rebuilding their society after the defeat of the Storm King, created collars that are more powerful than Discord. Something that nullifies magic that can bend the very fabric of reality. That's a huge leap in technology for this world, and they never explain it. You mean to tell me they had these all-powerful collars they could have used to stop Cosmos and they never used them? How did they create a collar more powerful than Draconiquus magic? This is the most contrived thing they could have come up with because they just needed a reason to stop Discord from instantly ending the conflict. I also really love how the elements of harmony are just assigned at random now, with characters that weren't given nearly enough establishment for it to make sense. In fact, that counts as another problem with this subplot. The meaning of the elements doesn't matter anymore because it feels like everyone is just assigned to them randomly regardless of personality. Even the design of the city is very pathetic for being a radical city that doesn't allow foreigners or magic. Shouldn't it look like a steampunk dictatorship, with large walls to prevent foreigners from entering and soldiers with large anti-magic armor to face magical threats? If any magic user started to attack, these guards look like they would be defeated without much of a fight. And that's not including the terrible inconsistencies with the writing. Like Fluttershy talks Discord out of using magic but then straight up doesn't give a shit about the no foreigners allowed sign. This is extremely uncharacteristic of the most docile character in the entire cast. And really, if we broke your laws I would expect you to arrest us? Why do you even point out the no loitering sign? You're outsiders. Your very presence is illegal. Also, what is with this monologue about the cats not being free? All we've seen is a no magic sign, a no loitering sign, and one police patrol group. Not a single citizen was shown to be miserable or oppressed. That's a lot of assumptions for Capper to just call the king a tyrant. It's also really shitty with how he gives a 3-page long monologue on the values of the elements of harmony, yet he's clearly lying about being a loyal citizen. And he was also a self-proclaimed grifter. That's 2 of the 6 elements shamelessly disregarded. Oh, and here's a head scratcher. The cat burglars use the term every creature despite never having even been outside their city. Last I checked, the cats have been living an isolated existence at least since the Storm King and probably forever. They should not know this word made up by Twilight, much less adopt it into their vocabulary. There's a lot of moments like this in the Capper storyline, and it's very distracting. And in general, the setup for Abyssinia is extremely lackluster. It's like they took the most boring aspects of the Zebra arc and just copy-pasted them here. The other cat burglars aren't interesting, and Capper somehow has even less established character than Sakura. And if Discord in the original finale wasn't bad enough, he says this: I did something stupid because I cared about some pony and not just because I wanted to. That's a new one for me. That, above everything else, dispels any lingering belief that he had good intentions. Way to ruin him more than he already was. Bottom line, the Capper arc isn't good either. It's stupid, boring, and rushed. The Captain Solano arc is the closest that comes to being interesting, but that's probably because they decided to trim all the fat from the other stories and just stuck to character interactions. But something that really distracts from it is the fact that it's supposed to be the 100th issue in the comic line. You'd think they would have done something special for this occasion. Maybe a flash forward to see life in Equestria during Twilight's reign, maybe a story about Spike's origin, maybe a midquel or a sequel to the events of The Last Problem. But nope, it's just more of this stupid Trees of Harmony nonsense. Yeah, way to celebrate 100 issues. As for the rest of the characters, they're more or less just added out of obligation. You got the main 6 who are just doing their own thing, and I guess it makes sense for them to be there since they're the original elements and they act as mentors to the new ones. But the rest might as well be invisible or just cut out of these issues entirely. They have no contribution to the story. Tempest Shadow and Rockhoof are mostly used for unfunny comic relief. Big Mac, Spitfire, and Meadowbrook do literally nothing. Trixie is a dumbass who keeps getting herself in trouble for no reason. Lyra and Bonbon hardly do anything at all. They do a tiny bit of spy stuff before being dismissed from the plot entirely. The only one who's kind of entertaining is Maud, and even then she's regulated to a background character in spite of being on the literal cover of the comic. So many of the characters are heavily underutilized to the point of rather not being included at all. The issues overall are lacking in good humor humor, so there's nothing to entertain you in between more dialogue-heavy scenes. The pacing is all over the place, from slow and boring to going way too fast with its dozens of plotlines, so you're barely given a chance to process what's going on. Even the trees of harmony don't have a real justification in these issues. Like the feuding dog families or the one about the cats don't need the trees to make them work. There's also a lot of failed attempts at drama that make the story more agitating to read. From Zeccora's unjustified behavior towards her friends to the horribly established conflict with the Knights of Harmony. And it really boggles my mind that they did nothing to celebrate 100 issues. Seriously, it's their 100th fucking comic. They should be taking a break from that shitty bootleg Trees of Harmony storyline and actually do something special. It's inexcusable how they cut and pasted the same plot 4 times in a row, and then try to cram in as much as possible into the final 2 issues and call it a cohesive story. It doesn't properly fit with any of the established continuity from the show and just feels like they made this up for the sake of being as epic as possible. And there's so many plot holes and contradictions to the lore of the show that it actively can't be part of the canon. And because of the way they chose to focus on the temple carvings, they just messed up the continuity even more. In one of the temples there's a clear image of Cosmos the Draconiquus, the villain of issue 75 through 78. So by having her appear in season 10, they're now saying that the Cosmos arc is canon, including within the show canon. As I said earlier, one of the benefits of the comics was that you can interpret them as non-canon. If there was a particular story you didn't like, you didn't need to worry about it being in conflict with the show. But by making Cosmos canon, they just opened a huge can of worms that's impossible to close. If the Cosmos arc is canon, that could mean that any of the comics are canon now. And they touch on this so briefly without bothering to explain anything that the case of which comic is or isn't canon is now a giant convoluted bowl of confusion. Is the Mirror Universe canon? Is Princess Sarah's canon? Is the one where they all turn into bat ponies canon? Is the feud between the Yaks and the Dragons canon? Is Siege of the Crystal Empire canon? One of the absolute worst storylines in the entire run of the comics? Not only have they completely butchered the continuity and lore through the roof with this revelation, but they've completely taken away the comic's ability to be viewed as their own separate thing from the show. If any one of them can be canon, how are we supposed to just ignore that a good chunk of them are in conflict with events in the show? Did they not take a single moment to think about the repercussions of this writing decision? Or are they really just that fucking stupid that they don't care about how bad this is going to look overall? Maybe this could have worked if they had more time to explore it and in a proper way, but there's so much crammed into a small amount of time that you can't get invested in what's going on. Surprisingly, the more interesting stories of season 10 are the ones focusing on Pinky. Probably because they do what they should have been doing the entire season, focusing on the characters moving on to new stages in their lives, instead of some overhyped adventure lore stuff. Seeing her just spend time with Cheese and developing an honest relationship with him gives us some insight on why they would end up together in the finale. We also get to see a new side of Marble Pie that's genuinely heartwarming to watch. It's both refreshing and entertaining to see her more enthusiastic and happy instead of timid and reserved, which just felt like a clone of pre-season 4 Fluttershy anyway. There's also a nice lesson tied into it with a heart-to-heart between Applejack and Pinky about everyone going on their own path in life. It's a character-driven story that focuses on relationships and personal issues, and because the stakes are low, it makes the situation easier to relate to. I talked before about the issues focusing more on Pinky and Cheese developing their relationship, so if you want you can just check those videos out in your free time. But aside from that, this 10th season does not work as a proper conclusion to the story of G4. If this is really what they had in mind for a 10th season of the show, I'm honestly glad that it ended at 9 seasons. Normally when the comics mess something up, you don't have to put so much stress into it because it can be considered non-canon. But they clearly meant for these issues to be canon to the show itself, which makes it all the more terrible when they end up failing. This 10th season doesn't feel like a conclusion to the story, or even in addition to the conclusion we got in the show. It just feels like a marketing strategy to push the mainline comics, which they were going to continue doing anyway after G4 was over. A lot of people say I was overly harsh on the G5 movie even though I explained the numerous ways that it doesn't work as a sequel to G4, but I'm willing to give the movie credit that it at least has some good stuff in it. I can't say anything like that for these issues of the main comic lineup because there's practically nothing good about them at all. They're a complete waste of time that you can easily skip and you wouldn't miss anything of value. The story is badly written, the pacing is a choppy mess, most of the characters are underutilized and annoying, the continuity mistakes are too numerous to ignore, and it's just so painfully boring. Even if you try to ignore the other problems these issues have, there's nothing interesting or unique about any of them. It actually does a very poor job holding your attention, rehashing the same story 4 times in a row before handing out a half-assed final battle that half the time is a bunch of lazy exposition dumping. It tries to be this really huge epic high-stakes story when really there's no thematic purpose to it. It would have been far more appropriate if these issues simply focused on the characters, well, living, growing up, exploring new stages in their lives, developing new relationships, flesh out characters that were underutilized in the show. That's way more interesting than this overblown lore-heavy Tree of Harmony nonsense. Wouldn't it make more sense for the final season of a slice of life show about interpersonal relationships to focus on personal character-driven stories? I wouldn't mind too much, except nothing about this 10th season was character-driven. It revolves entirely around poorly established world-building elements that don't properly align with the show. And in the end, it comes across as nothing but a cheap cash grab. And that's not what Friendship is Magic was. It was a show that actually cared about good storytelling. It took time to develop its world, flesh out its huge cast of characters, teach positive life lessons to its audience, inspire people to explore their talents, express themselves with breathtaking artwork and fan content, to prove that My Little Pony can be more than just a generic toy line for little girls. This is what makes Friendship is Magic an amazing show. Things that I fear are being lost with the very problematic execution of the G5 movie, as well as how horribly written this 10th season was. I'm honestly worried that the people behind this franchise are starting to give up on these things in favor of milking its popularity bone dry. And I've already seen this happen to so many franchises in the last few years that I've just grown tired of it. I'm tired of seeing beloved franchises being used as tools for corporations to gain money at the expense of any good writing. And if the last few years is any indication, I fear that it's only going to get worse and worse. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go wait for Sora to come out for Smash. Thanks for checking out my review. If you liked what you saw here and would like to support me, check out my Patreon in the description. Every little bit helps and I always appreciate those who support my work. Until next time, stay cool.